If you create a group that just goes like fundamentally against like the vast majority of people's values, then it's just going to be hard to find volunteer effort for that sort of thing.
So let's talk about something that's a little bit funny, which is if you start to replace government, as we were talking about, and you see it as a monopoly on violence, you notice that very often there's a very funny role played by organized crime. Now, of course, when we think about organized crime, we tend to get emotionally excited by it for whatever reason. We make lots of movies about it. It occupies the mind as something terrifying and alluring. And there's sort of two weird aspects to organized crime, one of which is violence as a contract enforcement mechanism. In other words, you're gambling, so you don't have access to the regular court system. Now you have a gambling debt. And so just the way our government would put you in jail if you started doing things, you couldn't fulfill all of your obligations and you were doing harm to lots of people and you couldn't be stopped. Organized crime has to do something. It can't maintain jails.
Yeah.
So it can put the hurt on somebody for means of contract enforcement. So it's not looking to do violent things. It's looking to run illegal businesses for which there's demand.
Yeah.
And then it has a problem of enforcement. Then there's another part of it, which is violence as the product. So, for example, extortion. It'd be a shame if anything were to happen to this lovely business that you're running, is a veiled threat. Pay us or we're going to do harm to your business. Or, contract killings and the like.
Yeah.
Are you worried that effectively by introducing parallel structures, both in the form of currency and in the form of contracts, smart contracts that are the sine qua non, I guess, of the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum,
Right.
that the killer app that is most likely to happen while the technology is still clunky and cumbersome and difficult is in the parallel space, that either you are going to replace organized crime as a place to do contractual business outside of the normal scope, which could be a benefit because organized crime still exists and is a bad thing because it uses violence, and you would use math in place of it, or that it could actually be used to facilitate violence by using, let's say, prediction markets or something else to induce people to commit crimes, where the committer of violence has unusual information about where the violence will be committed and therefore can profit from it.
It's definitely a worry that I and lots of people in the crypto space have had since the beginning. Though I do feel like at least so far I've been surprised. It feels like less of it has happened than we had expected.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Now, what accounts for the idea that something that can be dreamt has mostly not occurred?
I definitely have
maybe it's a great thing about humans that we didn't realize that we're not nearly the horrible people we thought we were.
Yeah, and I definitely have a couple of theories about this. So one of those theories is that, basically a lot of things that people do, and especially a lot of things that people do in the infosphere, because public goods are kind of chronically underfunded and all that, rely really heavily on goodwill. And so you have goodwill that if you pay someone to write some piece of software for your website, it's not going to include some
malicious code.
Yeah, some bug that'll steal people's money or tell the FBI where you are. If you create a system for enforcing agreements that they'll actually get enforced, then even on internet forums, they depend on kind of a lot of volunteer labor for just things like moderation. And if you create a group that just goes fundamentally against the vast majority of people's values, then it's just going to be hard to find volunteer effort for that sort of thing. And That's probably the big reason I think why so far we don't really see kind of complicated decentralized structures being created to facilitate black markets for killing people and so forth. Because
let's start off with something more mundane, like a numbers racket.
Right.
So a numbers racket would probably be a much simpler application.
So what do you mean by numbers racket here?
Well, it's something that takes the place of a lottery where let's say some naturally occurring number that would be printed in a newspaper, and presumably nobody has the influence over what number gets printed.
Right.
Constitutes the lotto draw.
Yeah, lotteries have existed on blockchain since the beginning.
Yeah.
Even there's definitely been this kind of sub-community of people that created these kind of provably fair Ponzi contracts where you have a smart contract and you can throw money in, and as soon if you're the nth person to throw money in, as soon as two n people throw money in, you get 1.9 back or something like that. And this is just a fun game that people have made and participated in, even fully knowing what the economics of the thing are. So yeah, and things like that have definitely happened, though I don't gambling is the sort of thing that there isn't this kind of 99% plus consensus that it's really horrible and evil, right? Because on the one hand, lots of people want to ban it, but on the other hand, people do it. And it's something that people see negative consequences of, but at the same time, it is something that people participate in and enjoy. Whereas the extremely bad stuff, there's definitely this kind of barrier between kind of things that are edgy versus things that are just so far over the edge. And for things that are kind of so far over the edge, it is even with smart contracts and even with all of those things, it's still hard to coordinate those structures. And I think the blockchain's inability to directly read facts about the real world could even be a saving grace here, because a blockchain can't directly read whether or not something in the real world happened. It basically means that if you want to have some application, whether a prediction market or something else that does
so can we say a little bit more about the intellectual problem that you're touching?
Sure.
So the idea is that there may be something that's very perceptible to us about the real world, but we might naively think, well, the computer should be able to tell whether that happened
right
or it didn't happen, and that's a surprisingly difficult thing to code up reliably so that the interface between the world of bits and bytes and the world of otherwise physical reality, which often we don't realize we're thinking about subjectively, that it's hard to maintain that interface so that the way in which the things that have happened in the real world can be definitely agreed upon without any kind of adjudication inside of the digital world.
Right. Yeah. So
I don't know how to say that well.
Blockchains are kind of fundamentally programmatic medium. All they see is data that gets fed into them and what they can compute as a result of that data. And so if you want to create a smart contract that says, if someone figures out what the prime factors of a big number are, pay them a reward, you can do that because prime factors are something that you can multiply together and verify. But if you want to have a smart contract that says, if there's a hurricane in Sri Lanka, then pay $500, then you can't do that on the blockchain itself. Because computer code has no idea what hurricanes are. It has no idea what Sri Lanka is.
No, but it could, in that case, you could have a designation that that the national
correct. You can get data from third-party sources, and this is the thing that
somebody else turns it into data.
Exactly. This is the thing that a lot of applications are doing. But the thing that's important to keep in mind is that as soon as you do that, your smart contract is no longer fully trustless.
Right.
Right.
So there's this concept, which is like a utopian concept of a trustless legal system, so that you don't have the messiness of humans anywhere in the system, and you can have complete faith and confidence in the contract that you've struck.
Yeah, right. And like outside of basically giving bounties for solving math problems, like it's not something that you can 100% achieve.
So I can't necessarily insure my vacation that if I go all the way to Argentina and the weather is terrible, it pays out because we can't agree what terrible weather is.
Right. Like you can create structures made out of individual participants that can try to kind of align incentives to get people to kind of give correct results. Like you can have complicated kind of contraptions involving people giving different answers and policing each other and rewarding people who give the same answer that other people have committed to and things like this. But like you can only try to approach the ideal of kind of correct truth. Like you can never 100% reach it.
Now you started Ethereum in 2014, 2015?
Started end of 2013. I mean, it launched in 2015.
Okay. Would you say, let's use launch date as an artificial date. Would you say you are more or less excited emotionally than you were when it started? You've now been through, you've logged some miles here.
I've definitely excited. More
excited.
I think the main difference is kind of more definitely kind of excited in the sense of like 4 years. Well, definite kind of as opposed to indefinite. Right? Like 4 years, 4 years ago was about like, hey, let's make this platform to kind of try a bunch of really cool things. We have no idea what's going to happen and let's just stick it out there. And now, like, we know things about things that people are already doing. We know things about things that people wants to do, and we also know more about like what the limitations are. And so instead of just being this kind of extremely fuzzy dream of like, let's stick smart contracts and algorithms and kind of trustlessify everything,
right? It's
something that's kind of both more moderate, but also kind of more like seeming much more like it actually has a big chance of kind of transforming the world, kind of precisely because it's kind of moderated to some extent.